I remember the sound of my stomach growling louder than the crowd. I was 14, barefoot and fighting a grown man for a sack of rice. The ring, just a dirt patch behind an old church. The gloves, my skin. They said I was too poor to even dream, too skinny, too untrained, too nothing. But what they didn't know was that every punch I threw was aimed at something bigger than just an opponent. And the day I stepped into the real ring was the day I started tearing down empires with my fists. There's something people never understand about hunger. It doesn't just live in your stomach, it lives in your bones, in your fists, in your silence. I didn't grow up dreaming of being a champion. I grew up dreaming of surviving. Some kids sleep with teddy bears. I slept with hunger. Some kids skip school for fun. I skipped because I had to sell bread. Some kids dreamed of being famous. I just wanted to hit something hard enough that the world would finally hear me. They told me I had no chance, too poor, too skinny, too nobody. But they forgot something. Pain, when you carry it long enough, turns into power. And that's what this story is about. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a war story, told one punch at a time. In this video, you're going to see what happens when the world laughs at a kid who has nothing, and what happens when that kid decides to fight back, not just for himself, but for everyone who's ever been underestimated, ignored, or broken. You're going to feel the dirt under my feet, the sting of blood in my eyes, and then you'll hear the silence that came after the final bell, when even the empire I faced couldn't find the words. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see yourself in my fight. Because no matter where you come from, how much you've lost, or how many times they told you no, you are not done. If this story touches you, drop a comment and tell me what country and city you're watching from. It matters. I want to know where this fight echoes. Hit subscribe if you believe that pain can be power. Smash that like button if you've ever been told you couldn't and decided to prove them wrong. This is more than a fight. This is how I turned fists into fire. I didn't even have shoes. And no, that's not some dramatic metaphor. I mean that literally. My feet touched dirt, glass, gravel, and burning pavement before they ever touched canvas. I was the kind of poor that made other poor kids feel lucky. And I hated every second of it. Not because I wanted fancy things. I didn't even know what fancy felt like. I hated it because it made me invisible. When you're a barefoot kid selling bread on the streets, people don't look at you. They look through you, like you're a smudge on their window, something to be wiped away so they can see their own life more clearly. There was no gym, no coach, no gloves. There was just a plastic bag of stale bread hanging from my shoulder and an ache in my stomach that I'd learned to ignore. Hunger wasn't a moment. It was a condition. It lived inside me, like a voice whispering, "You don't matter." But I wasn't always hungry for food. Some days I was hungry to be noticed, to matter to someone, to exist in someone's world, even if just for a second. The first time I fought, it wasn't for money. It wasn't even for pride. It was for rice. A man tried to snatch it from me, the only food I had to bring home that day, and I swung at him without thinking. I was small, weak, underfed, and outmatched. He hit me so hard my ears rang for hours, but I kept coming back, kept swinging. And when it was over, when he finally walked away laughing, I realized something strange. I felt alive. Not proud, not victorious, just real. For those few seconds, I wasn't invisible anymore. I existed. And something in me decided I needed more of that. From that moment, I started fighting on purpose. Street corners, docks, alleyways behind markets. There was no prize, just the sound of someone calling my name, the sound of someone acknowledging I was there. It was enough. But that feeling, it would cost me more than I ever imagined. I trained with whatever I could find. Old tires became footwork drills, rocks became weights. Broken mirrors helped me fix my stance. I watched other fighters, how they moved when they blinked, where their balance shifted before they threw a punch. I wasn't just training my body, I was studying the language of violence, the rhythm of survival. I was building a vocabulary of pain because I didn't have the luxury of a classroom. Some nights I came home with a busted lip, some nights with a black eye. My mother never asked who hit me. She just looked down, sighed, and gave me whatever food was left, usually a spoonful of rice, sometimes just water. Once I came home bleeding and she asked, "Did you win?" I told her I didn't lose. She smiled. That was enough for both of us. The neighborhood laughed when I said I wanted to be a boxer. "Boxers wear shoes," they said. "Boxers have managers, passports, clean hands." I had none of that. What I had was hunger. Not the kind that made your stomach growl. The kind that made your soul scream. If no one was going to save us, I'd have to become the kind of man who could. I trained in silence, I fought in noise, and slowly, word started spreading. That barefoot kid can take a punch. But I didn't want to be known for taking hits. I wanted to be known for delivering them. One day, after a fight near the pier, a man approached me. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't laughing or mocking or handing out loose change for a show. He just watched, closely. When I lost, because yes, I still lost sometimes, he walked up to me and said, "Kid, you don't fight like the others. You fight like you're trying to prove something." And in that moment, I knew everything was about to change. Because that man didn't just see a fighter. He saw a story, a future, a reason. And for the first time, someone wanted to train me, not just watch me bleed. But I wasn't ready for what would come next. Because the road to becoming a champion isn't paved with victory, it's soaked in failure, and my first taste of real boxing would break me in ways I wasn't prepared for. They say the ring is the fairest place on earth, that inside those ropes, it's just two men, two bodies, two wills, no lies, no excuses, just sweat and truth. But the first time I stepped into a real ring, I learned something different. The ring isn't fair. It doesn't care how much pain you've felt, how hungry you've been, how hard you trained. It only cares about power. And if you come from the wrong side of the rope, the side without money, name, or shoes, the ring will chew you up before it ever lets you belong. I still remember the way the gym smelled the first time I walked in with that man who saw me fight near the pier. Sweat, old leather, and something else. Pride. It was a small place, barely more than a warehouse with ropes. But to me, it was a palace. The fighters inside had clean wraps on their hands, real gloves, headgear, and shoes that looked brand new. I walked in wearing flip-flops with duct tape holding them together. They all turned to look. One laughed under his breath. Another said something in English I didn't understand. But I understood the tone. It was the same one I'd heard on the streets. The tone that said, "You don't belong here." They gave me a chance to spar on my first day. I think they wanted to humiliate me, to teach me my place. I wasn't ready. The kid they threw me in with had 2 years of training and a punch like a truck. I took 3 shots to the ribs before I could even raise my guard. My head snapped back from a right hook, and my lips split open. Blood hit the mat, and the coach, the real coach, started shouting, "Stop the round!" But I didn't stop. Because for me, getting beat wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Going home feeling invisible again, that was worse. So I pushed forward, threw wild punches, sloppy, desperate. I caught the other kid once, just once, on the chin, and he stepped back, not far, but enough. I saw his eyes change. For the first time, he took me seriously. That was the moment I realized I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to survive long enough to make them see me. But surviving came with a price I hadn't calculated. I was the gym's joke for weeks. They called me Stray Dog, always hungry, always scrappy, always dirty. I got the worst gloves, the worst rounds, the worst looks. When water was passed around, they skipped me. When equipment was handed out, they forgot me. I said nothing, because if that was the cost of standing in the ring, then I'd pay it, again and again. I didn't want comfort. I wanted a shot, but every day felt heavier than the last. My muscles ached. My bones screamed. My mother was working 2 jobs by then, and I was still skipping meals just to stay light. My friends, the ones I had, stopped calling. They didn't understand why I chose pain over peace. I didn't even understand it myself. Until one day, the coach called me over. He looked at my hands, blistered, raw, covered in old tape, and said, "You don't have what it takes, kid. You don't move like a boxer. You move like someone who's afraid of falling." I didn't respond. I just looked him in the eyes and said, "I've already fallen. That's why I'm not afraid anymore." He didn't say a word, just turned and walked away. But those words stayed with me, because in that moment, I knew something was shifting. I wasn't just fighting other boxers, I was fighting the ring itself, the system that was never built for people like me. And that fight? It was only getting started. A week later, one of the top prospects in the gym injured his wrist. They needed someone to replace him in a local tournament. Nobody volunteered, except me. They laughed, of course, said I'd get torn apart, that I'd embarrass the gym, that I'd be out in the first round, but I didn't care. I'd already been laughed at my whole life. What's one more round? I stepped into the ring that night with a pair of borrowed gloves and the same shoes I'd worn for 5 years. The lights were brighter than anything I'd ever seen. The crowd was small, but loud. I could hear their laughter before I even threw a punch, but that night, something changed, because I wasn't the same kid from the pier anymore, and they weren't ready for what I'd become. The bell rang. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just moved. Not with elegance, not with grace, but with fury. Every punch I threw wasn't just for me. It was for my mother, for the rice she skipped, for the nights I slept hungry, for every time someone said I didn't belong here. And when the first round ended, I was still standing, blood in my mouth, yes, but smiling, because for once I was on the right side of the ring. But what came after that fight was something even I wasn't ready for. Hunger doesn't leave you just because you've been noticed. It doesn't vanish after one fight or after one compliment. It lingers. It hides in the space between heartbeats. I had won my first official bout, but I didn't go home with a trophy. I went home with bruises, a swollen jaw, and just enough cash to buy rice for the week. And you know what? That felt like luxury. That felt like winning the lottery. But deep down, I knew something dangerous was happening. I was beginning to feel like the ring owed me more than just money. I wanted respect. I wanted to matter. I wanted to climb. Every punch I threw after that wasn't just a strike. It was a message. It said, "I'm still here." And I had no choice but to keep proving it over and over again, because no matter how hard I fought, there was always someone bigger, someone richer, someone who trained in a real gym, someone who didn't have to wonder if he'd eat that night. I was hungry, not just for food, but for revenge against every second of silence I'd endured in my life, every ignored cry, every shut door, every time someone crossed the street to avoid me because I looked too poor to be worth trusting. I fought like my life depended on it, because in many ways it did. I wasn't chasing fame. I was chasing survival with blood in my teeth and calluses on my knuckles. When I woke up in the mornings, I felt my body scream. My ribs were always sore. My hands bled through the wraps. My shoulders clicked when I stretched, but there was no room for rest. I still worked part-time delivering fish before training. Still carried crates heavier than me just to earn coins. Still trained under the same flickering light bulb that buzzed like a mosquito in that barely functioning gym. And yet, I felt myself changing. Getting faster, stronger, my footwork sharper, my combinations smarter. People who once mocked me were now stepping aside when I entered the gym, not in fear, but in respect, or maybe caution, maybe curiosity. Whatever it was working. I was no longer invisible, but success doesn't feed you forever. and praise doesn't pay rent. The next fight was tougher. The guy I faced had a sponsor, a personal trainer, a corner full of people cheering his name like he already won. I didn't even have proper tape for my gloves. My coach tightened them with a shoelace. My mother kissed my forehead before I left the house and handed me a small folded note. I didn't read it. I stuffed it in my pocket and promised myself I'd open it after the fight. Only if I won. I walked into that ring with silence behind me and noise in front. The crowd didn't cheer for me. They barely acknowledged me. I was the stepping stone, the nobody meant to be flattened for someone else's highlight reel. But I've always been good at ruining other people's plans, because when the bell rang, I wasn't just fighting him. I was fighting for every person who'd ever swallowed their hunger with pride. The first round was brutal. He hit harder than anyone I'd faced. Not just strength, but precision, like he had a map of my ribs. I stumbled early, caught a right hook to the ear that made the world tilt sideways. For a second, I thought I'd black out. I felt the ref watching me closely, ready to jump in. But I stared back at him with blood in my eyes and fists still raised. In the second round, I adjusted, tightened my guard, watched his footwork, waited for his rhythm. And then I found my opening. A clean shot to the liver that made him gasp. The first crack in the armor, the first sign that he was human. After that, I kept pressing. Body shots, quick jabs. I didn't have the flash, I didn't have the fans, but I had grit, I had a reason. We went the full distance. No knockout, no dramatic finish. Just two broken bodies in the center of the ring, panting like dogs, waiting for the decision. And when the announcer called my name and that tiny forgotten name as the winner, I didn't jump. I didn't scream. I just smiled. Quiet. Full. Not of pride, but of peace. Back in the locker room, I sat alone and remembered the note in my pocket. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It simply said, "No matter what happens, you've already won." And that's when I broke. Not from pain, from love. From the reminder that someone believed in me even before the bell rang. But love alone doesn't build a career. And soon, I'd learned that the world only remembers you if you make enough noise. That win got attention. Local promoters started watching. Journalists started writing. A name was whispered, mine, like maybe, just maybe, I had a shot at something bigger than survival. But bigger dreams come with bigger costs. And the higher you climb, the lonelier it gets. I wasn't just a fighter anymore. I was a target. And the next fight waiting for me, it wasn't just another kid from the neighborhood. It was the gatekeeper to everything I'd ever wanted, and everything I'd never dared to believe I could reach. And this time, if I lost, I wouldn't just lose the fight. I'd lose everything I'd fought for until now. I had never owned a suitcase. The first time I held one, it wasn't even mine. It was borrowed. The handle was worn, the zipper was rusty, and inside it, I stuffed everything I had, one clean shirt, a change of pants, and my faith folded between the seams. I wasn't going on vacation. I was going to fight, but not like before. This fight was in another country, with rules, with cameras, with people speaking a language I didn't understand. Everything about it felt foreign, distant, and dangerous, because for the first time in my life, I had something to lose. It was a one-way ticket, a crumpled piece of paper that felt too small to carry the weight of what it meant. They said I had talent, that I could represent my country, that some promoters were interested in seeing the wild street kid fight in a real ring. But the truth, I was just a cheap bet, an exotic face, an unpredictable punch, a gamble signed with a borrowed pen on a contract no one expected me to survive, and still, I went. The flight felt endless. My ears popped from the pressure, but my chest burned more. I stared out the window and asked myself, what if I fail? What if they're all right about me? What if I'm just a barefoot kid with fists too small for the weight of his own dreams? But there was something inside me louder than that plane engine. the belief that this was my one chance to get off the ground. When the plane landed, the world felt like a different planet. The air smelled different. The streets were clean. Everything was in order. And me? I felt like a stain on a white shirt. They dropped me off at a cold, silent gym. No music, no smiles, just walls and ropes. The other fighters didn't look me in the eye. They spoke in fast English I couldn't follow. They laughed. They studied me like a curiosity. I trained in silence, watched. I mimicked movements. I swallowed every insult like it was protein. I got the worst hours, the worst gear. No one said my name. They just pointed and said, "You." But I kept showing up, because that cold floor was still warmer than the street I used to sleep on. My first fight was scheduled for the following week. A local event, nothing big, but it had a camera crew. I was the opening bout, the warm-up act. "Nobody watches the first fight anyway," they said. I heard them. I didn't care. This wasn't about the crowd. It was about the echo. I wanted that fight, that sound, to cross oceans and reach the alley I came from. I wanted my mother to know I was still standing. I trained until I bled. And when I bled, I smiled, because blood meant growth, pain meant progress. None of this was easy, but I didn't want easy. I wanted every punch to scream louder than the silence I was raised in. On fight day, they gave me a faded red pair of shorts and gloves that barely fit. The stitching itched my wrists. The locker room smelled like fear. But what moved me wasn't courage. It was urgency. I knew that if I lost that night, I wasn't just losing a match, I was disappearing. Back to the shadows, back to fish markets, back to silence. And there, under the lights, I realized it wasn't about winning. It was about surviving in front of those who thought you'd already lost. My opponent looked like he belonged in a movie. Tall, clean cut, perfect hair, sponsors on his shorts. He walked in smiling, winking at the cameras. I walked in quiet, not out of fear, out of purpose. I wasn't entertainment. I was a sentence. I was either a victory or an afterthought. The bell rang. The first seconds were all study. He was fast, sharp, confident. He hit me hard, once to the nose, once to the jaw. My ears rang, my vision flickered. The ref looked ready to step in, but I stared him down. My hands were still up, my heart still open. In round 2, I adjusted. Tighter guard, cleaner counters. I watched his rhythm, waited, then slipped in a liver shot. Crisp. He grunted, took a step back. I saw the crack in his armor. He bled, he breathed heavy. He was no god, just another man. By the third round, he was gasping. His punches lost snap. Mine was still sharp. I remembered every hungry night, every time I went to sleep with my stomach caved in, every time someone said I wouldn't make it. And I turned all of that into movement, into fire, into fists. We went the distance, no knockout, just 2 battered bodies and a silence hanging over the decision. And when they raised my hand, the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't boo, they just froze, because no one saw it coming. But that silence wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the noise that would change my life forever. I thought the win would open doors. I thought I'd finally earned a seat at the table. But the truth, all I earned was a bigger target on my back. The moment my name started echoing in gyms and fight halls, it didn't bring applause. It brought calculation. I wasn't a fighter anymore. I was a product, a threat. And someone, somewhere, decided it was time to test just how badly I wanted this dream. Not with gloves, but with games. It started with a phone call, short, cold. "You've been selected to fight Daniel the Golden Boy Reyes. 2 weeks, Vegas." That was it. No negotiations, no discussion. It felt more like a sentence than an opportunity. Everyone knew who Reyes was. A golden child of American boxing, Olympic pedigree, sponsors dripping off him like sweat, born into wealth, trained in facilities I'd only seen in magazines, a crowd favorite. He had private coaches, nutritionists, a personal PR team. He didn't fight to survive, he fought for legacy. He was groomed for greatness. And I was invited to play the role of the underdog, the stepping stone. They didn't want a fight, they wanted a story. The immigrant who tries but fails, the humble warrior humbled again. I could already hear the narrative being shaped before I even boarded the plane. But they didn't know me because I wasn't walking into that ring to play a role. I was walking in to rewrite the entire script. The contract was brutal. I was offered pennies compared to what Reyes was earning. I'd be fighting in his city, on his turf, under his promoter. No time to acclimate, no tune-up fight, just a quick blood sacrifice to the altar of hype. But I signed it with a calm hand. Because I knew this wasn't about fairness. It never was. It was about making them regret giving me that spotlight, even for one night. Training for that fight felt different, heavier. Every session came with whispers. You sure about this? Don't get yourself hurt. Even my coach seemed hesitant, but I was locked in, obsessed. I studied every tape of Reyes I could find, watched his footwork, his breathing patterns, the way he lowered his left after a jab. I didn't just want to win, I wanted to expose the illusion. Vegas was a different world. Neon lights, fast cars, cameras flashing at people who'd never thrown a punch. I walked through hotel lobbies like a ghost, ignored, invisible. While Reyes was treated like royalty, press conferences were a joke. They barely let me speak, asked me where I was from, then pivoted to jokes about my height, my reach, my lack of pro polish. I smiled, nodded. Let them build the illusion taller, because the taller it stood, the louder it would crash. The night before the fight, I sat alone in my room. No entourage, no media, just me and the weight of everything I carried. I opened my bag. Inside, tucked under my gloves, was a photo of my family, my mother with her cracked hands, my siblings sleeping shoulder to shoulder on one mattress. That was my legacy. That was my reason. Reyes had titles. I had hunger. And hunger has a longer reach than any arm. Fight night. The arena was glowing with anticipation. Reyes entered like a prince, robe shining, music loud, cameras chasing his every blink. The crowd chanted his name like a hymn. When I walked in, there was no music, no pyrotechnics, just footsteps and breath. But I liked it that way. Let them underestimate me. Let them relax. Round one began, and I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't worried. Not really. He danced around me, tossed feints like candy, tested me with jabs. They landed, he was fast, sharp, but I didn't flinch. I absorbed, measured, waited. In round two, I returned the message. Slipped his right and countered with a body shot that made him blink twice. His corner shouted. He smiled to cover it, but I saw the dent, saw the realization beginning to grow. The next few rounds were war. He landed clean shots. I returned fire. The crowd began to quiet. The script was cracking. The highlight reel was glitching. Every time he tried to turn up the heat, I answered with rhythm and rage. By round 6, the noise was gone. There was no music now, just leather against flesh and the quiet panic of a favorite unraveling in front of thousands. Reyes started to clinch, his face swelling, his mouth hanging open between breaths, and as the bell rang for the 7th, I knew this fight wouldn't be remembered for who they expected to win, but for who refused to lose. The 7th round ended, and for a second everything was quiet. I didn't even hear the bell. All I heard was my own breath, rough and sharp like I'd been running uphill for miles. Sweat was dripping down my face, blood was drying on my cheek, and across from me stood a version of Daniel Reyes no one had ever seen before. Uncertain, exhausted, and cracked open for the world to witness. He didn't sit down between rounds. He leaned against the ropes, arms over the top strand, like a prisoner waiting for judgment. His corner was screaming in every direction. Ice, towels, panic. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Not for him. I sat down. My coach looked at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. Not a word came from his mouth. He just placed a cold compress on my neck and whispered, "Finish it." That was all I needed. Round 8 started, and I didn't wait. I charged, not with recklessness, with rhythm. My fists were speaking now. They were saying things I never could. Every jab was a childhood memory. Every hook was a night without dinner. Every uppercut was a response to every man who told me I wasn't enough. Reyes covered up. His guard was tight, but his soul was unraveling. I saw it in his posture. He wasn't defending a title anymore. He was surviving a storm. I backed him into a corner and threw combinations he'd never felt before. Not in training camps, not in the Olympics, not ever. Then it happened. A right cross slipped through his guard and clipped his jaw. His knees buckled. The crowd gasped. He didn't fall, not yet. But everyone knew what was coming. For the first time in his life, the golden boy was drowning, and I wasn't throwing him a rope. The ref watched closely. I stepped back, gave Reyes a moment. I wasn't hunting a knockout. I was revealing the truth. This fight wasn't about who hit harder. It was about who had been hit longer, who had lived inside the punch. And Reyes had never tasted that kind of hunger. The final rounds played out like a slow-motion collapse. Reyes was still there, standing, punching, moving, but his timing was gone, his eyes unfocused. Meanwhile, I got sharper, quieter, deadlier. The crowd had shifted. They weren't cheering anymore. They were watching in awe, unsure of what to believe. Their hero was falling, and the kid they dismissed was rising in real time. When the bell rang to end the 10th and final round, the silence in the arena was louder than any applause I'd ever dreamed of. The announcer's voice boomed, but I barely heard him. My arms were heavy, my vision blurred. Then I felt it, the ref grabbing my wrist, lifting it, declaring the winner, and just like that, everything stopped. But the real fight was never in the ring. It was what came after the victory, when the spotlight finally turned to me. Reporters who ignored me all week now pushed mics in my face. Questions, flashes, noise. I had no media training, no manager, just my voice, hoarse, cracked, unfiltered. They asked how I did it, how I beat someone better. I looked at them and said one word: hunger. The promoter was forced to shake my hand, his face frozen between frustration and forced politeness. He congratulated me with dead eyes, because he knew this wasn't good for business. The crowd didn't come to see a poor kid from the other side of the world dismantle their American dream, but I did it anyway. Within hours, the narrative started to shift. Online, I was called a fluke. Some said Reyes was injured. Others said he wasn't focused. They tried to rewrite the outcome, diminish it, bury it. But the footage didn't lie. The blood on Reyes's lip didn't lie. My bruised knuckles didn't lie. What followed wasn't red carpets or fame. It was silence. Doors that were supposed to open stayed shut. Sponsors ghosted. Promoters delayed calls. I became a threat, not an asset. A reminder that real fighters don't come from privilege. They come from pain, and that truth scared them. I went back to the gym. Alone, no entourage, just me and the heavy bag, punch after punch, day after day, because I knew they couldn't ignore me forever. They could delay the spotlight, but they couldn't dim my fire, because deep down, I wasn't chasing fame. I was chasing the echo of a promise I made to a little boy holding a dream in his bare hands. People think winning changes everything, that once your hand is raised, the world suddenly opens up. But they never talk about what comes after the lights fade. They don't tell you about the silence, the suspicion, the bitterness in the eyes of those who used to look down on you, and now look through you like you're a problem they didn't plan for. After I beat Reyes, I thought my phone would never stop ringing. But days turned into weeks and nothing came. No new fight offers, no interviews, no sponsorship deals, just silence and whispers behind closed doors. I wasn't marketable, they said. My accent was too thick. I didn't smile enough. I didn't connect with American audiences. All code for one thing: I didn't fit their image of a champion. The people who once tried to break me now tried to erase me. I was labeled a one-hit wonder, a lucky punch, a fluke. They said Reyes wasn't at his best that night, that he had an injury, that the judges were biased, anything to protect the narrative they were building, the one where their golden boy could never fall. I watched it all happen from the same gym where it all started. Still no fancy equipment, no new shoes, just sweat and silence. The bag didn't care if I was a winner. The floor still echoed the same whether I was a champion or a ghost, but I kept training, because the ring didn't lie, people did. And deep down, I knew the fight wasn't over. It had just changed shape. They offered me one fight. One. Months later. Overseas. No promotion. Bad purse. Against an undefeated Russian brawler with a reputation for knockouts. It wasn't an opportunity. It was an ambush. A quiet execution. A correction to the story they didn't like. But I said yes. Not because I was desperate, but because I was done waiting for approval. I flew alone. No coach this time, no translator. Just a promise I'd made to myself. Never let them dictate your worth. The venue was cold. The crowd unfriendly. I could feel it. This wasn't a celebration of sport. It was a spectacle of silence. They wanted me to vanish. The fight was brutal. The Russian was everything they said he'd be. Strong, fast, merciless. But he was also careless, arrogant. He'd never fought someone who didn't fear him, and fear was never part of my style. We went 6 rounds, each one a war. He bloodied my nose, but I broke his rhythm. He landed more punches, but I landed the ones that mattered. When the decision came, it was close, too close. They gave it to him, split decision. And just like that, I was erased. The headlines didn't say, Pacquiao stuns again in war abroad. They said, Reyes loss avenged, balance restored. But I knew the truth. The fans who watched knew, my opponent knew, and most importantly, they knew. But what they didn't expect was that people had already started listening to my silence. Somehow, my story began to spread. Not through mainstream media, but through whispers, through underground fight forums, YouTube compilations, social media clips shared with subtitles and fire emojis. People weren't just watching the fights, they were watching me. The quiet kid who never got a shot, but never stopped swinging. I started receiving messages from kids in Manila, from Detroit, from Rio, from South Africa, fighters who felt invisible, who said, "When I saw you fight, I believed maybe I could too." I'd never cried in the ring, but I cried reading those messages. That's when it hit me. My victory wasn't about a title belt. It wasn't about headlines. It was about creating a crack in the wall, a space where others could slip through. It was about becoming the proof they said didn't exist. The price of that victory? It was isolation, exile, rejection. But it bought something worth more than money. It bought truth. And truth always finds its way back to the surface. And in that quiet place where champions are forgotten, I started building something they couldn't ignore. They thought they had silenced me. After Reyes, after Russia, after every almost and not quite, they assumed I'd fade like a forgotten headline. They thought I'd go back to wherever they believed I came from, a village, a hole, a past that didn't fit in their narrative of glory. But what they didn't understand is that I never burned for applause. My fire came from somewhere they couldn't reach. While their champions healed in spas and slept in silk sheets, I was training on concrete floors, punching against gravity itself. I didn't need motivation. I was the motivation. I fought for the ghosts, for the barefoot kids in alleys, for the fathers who broke their backs, for the mothers who went hungry so their sons could eat. And the more they tried to bury me, the deeper I rooted. I stopped waiting for calls. I started climbing. Small fights, underground cards, dirty venues with leaking roofs and crowds that bet with crumpled bills. I fought in warehouses, on ships, in border towns. Sometimes no ring, just a square of duct tape on concrete. But every fight had weight. Every opponent was another wall, another test, another reminder that fire, when contained, only burns hotter. And somewhere in that obscurity, people started watching again. Not the gatekeepers, the people. Clips of my fights, grainy, shaky, started going viral. Not because I was flashy, but because I was real. Raw power, ruthless precision. No entourage, no entrance music. Just a man who refused to lose. They started calling me the Storm. Not for how I entered, but for what I left behind. One clip, a brutal 8-second KO in Mexico, got over 10 million views. And suddenly, I wasn't just a ghost in the circuit. I was a question mark in the industry. Promoters started whispering again, not about contracts, about control. Who owns him? Who's backing him? Why is he still winning? They couldn't understand it. I wasn't owned. I wasn't backed. I had no machine, just pain, purpose, and two fists sharpened by years of being told no. An independent promoter from New York finally reached out. No strings, no games, just one offer: headline a televised fight in Brooklyn against a rising prospect named Leon Price. Younger, taller, heavier, but untested. They wanted a war. I was ready to give them a funeral, because by now I wasn't fighting to be seen. I was fighting so they'd never be able to look away again. The moment I walked into that arena, I felt it. Not respect, recognition. People didn't cheer. They stared, like they were trying to solve the mystery. Who was this guy that kept surviving, kept winning, kept coming back? Price was everything a promoter loved. Big smile, bigger muscles, clean record. His fans held signs, chanted his name. I didn't mind. I'd heard louder silence in my life. The bell rang. He charged like a freight train. I didn't move. I let him throw everything. Jabs, hooks, uppercuts, all fast, all hollow. I'd seen this before. Fire without control, power without pain. I studied him like a surgeon, every move, every breath. I saw the doubt enter his eyes by round 3. That's when I went to work. Body shot, jab, counter, angle, hit, disappear, return. He swung harder, wider, angrier, and I thanked him for it. By round 5, the chance turned to confusion, then worry, then silence. And in that silence, I whispered my truth with fists. Because the louder they cheered for him, the more devastating it felt when he fell. I knocked him out cold in round 6. Not out of malice, out of mercy. He didn't belong in there with someone who'd bled for this. He wasn't ready for a man who fought like every punch was a mortgage, a meal, a reason to live. The crowd stood, not in celebration, in shock. Cameras flashed, reporters ran. Suddenly, I was a headline again. Not because they wanted it, but because they couldn't deny it anymore. And for the first time, they asked a different question, not who let him in, but how long can he stay? The night I knocked out Leon Price, I walked back to the locker room alone. No celebration, no entourage, just the sound of my wraps peeling off, slow and sticky, like I was tearing off the last pieces of who they said I was. The promoters didn't speak to me after the fight. They avoided eye contact, as if looking at me too long would confirm what they feared, that the machine they built had failed again, that the so-called underdog didn't just win. He rewrote the rules. And no one likes a fighter who doesn't play his part. The press called me unpredictable, unmarketable. One headline read, "Rogue fighter dismantles the system again." I wasn't surprised. I wasn't playing the game, so they labeled me a threat. But the fans, they saw something else. They saw someone who couldn't be controlled, someone who fought for something deeper than gold or belts. And that scared the system more than any punch I could throw. So they stopped trying to box me in and started trying to shut me out completely. Big fights, cancelled, title shots, dodged, sponsorships, ghosted. They blackballed me quietly, efficiently, not with open rejection, with silence, a vacuum, no calls, no answers, no explanations. I wasn't banned. I was erased, so I built louder. I started posting my training. Brutal sessions, old school drills, bleeding hands, calloused knuckles, no filters, no fake smiles, just truth. The kind of truth their champions were too polished to show. The audience grew, my inbox exploded. Not with contracts, but with stories. People from all over, ex-athletes, janitors, kids with broken dreams, telling me my fight was theirs too. That every punch I threw was proof that the forgotten still mattered, so I kept fighting. Not just in rings, but in parking lots, in alleys, on makeshift mats behind warehouses. They called them unsanctioned, I called them necessary, because I refused to disappear quietly. I refused to be their lesson. I was becoming their warning, and the more they tried to bury me, the more I became the storm they couldn't control. One night, during a fight in an abandoned gym in Newark, something changed. It wasn't the punches. It wasn't even the win. I knocked the guy out in 2 rounds. It was who was in the crowd. A man in a sharp coat, no camera, no notes, just watching. After the fight, he approached me outside. Didn't introduce himself right away. Just looked at me like I was a wild dog someone had finally tracked down. "You're trouble," he said. I didn't respond. He smiled. I like trouble. Turned out, he was the head of a new promotion, independent but hungry. Tired of the politics, tired of the manufactured heroes. He wanted chaos. He wanted me. He offered me a fight, televised, high stakes, big arena, but not against another prospect. No, against a champion. An undefeated champion. A belt was on the line. Finally, they thought I was a problem before, but I was about to become a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. I didn't hesitate. The venue sold out in days. The crowd split. Half there to see me fail, half there to watch the empire fall. My opponent, polished, smiling, coached to perfection. Everything I wasn't. But he had never bled in silence, never been broken and rebuilt without applause. He had no idea what was coming. The night of the fight, I stood backstage, gloves tightened, heart silent. This wasn't just another round. This was retribution. Not just for me, but for every fighter who was told to wait their turn, for every dream delayed by politics, for every fist that punched but was never seen. They called me a problem, so I became the reason the entire system cracked. The crowd was screaming, but I couldn't hear them. Not because the arena wasn't loud, it was deafening, but because inside I was somewhere else entirely. Back in that shack in the Philippines. Back in the days I sold donuts barefoot. Back in the night I fought hunger more often than opponents. Back when I thought champion was just a word printed on someone else's poster. Now, here I was, standing in front of a world champion. Gloves taped tight, muscles cold and tense, cameras flashing. My name on the banner, but the voice in my head wasn't saying, "You made it." It was saying, "Now show them why." The bell rang. Round 1 was fast, not because of punches, but because of pressure. He was taller, richer, sharper. He had a team, a private chef, a life designed to protect him from men like me, and still he looked nervous. He kept glancing between rounds, looking at his corner, his coach, even the ref, like he was searching for something that wasn't there. Maybe it was certainty, or maybe it was comfort. But comfort had never won me a fight. Only hunger had, and mine had teeth. That night I wasn't just trying to win. I was trying to end everything they built, in one punch. In the 4th round I started breaking him down, body first, then rhythm, then ego. He couldn't understand it, how someone with so little could come with so much fire. Every time he hit me I smiled. Every time I hit him, he blinked slower. By round 6, I could hear his breathing change. It wasn't just fatigue, it was fear. And I remembered what that felt like. The cold kind, the one you feel not in your chest but in your spine. The kind that whispers, "You're not supposed to be here." But this time I wasn't the one hearing it, he was. And that's when I knew. This was more than a fight. This was a funeral for every lie they told about me. That I was too poor, too short, too foreign, too quiet. That the only place for me was behind the curtain, never under the spotlight. I buried all that with a left hook in round 7. He fell like a statue, hands out, eyes open, and the moment his body hit the canvas, the entire arena stood. Not in outrage, in silence. Because when the system breaks, people don't know whether to cheer or apologize. They crowned me that night, put the belt on my shoulder, shoved a mic in my face, asked me how I felt. I didn't give them a speech. I just said, I wasn't supposed to be here, but here I am, and I'm not leaving. Then I walked off. No parade, no champagne, just the sound of the crowd shifting. A room realizing that something irreversible had happened. But the most important part came later, when I sat alone in the locker room, sweat cold on my neck, hands shaking not from exhaustion, but from something heavier. A weight I'd carried for years, a weight no one saw. The pressure of proving your worth every day. The shame of being invisible in a world that only sees money, color, connections. The bitterness of watching others skip lines you built with your own blood. And for the first time, that weight started to fade. Not because the fight was over, but because I realized something. I had nothing left to prove. The world gave me nothing, and still I gave it everything, and it was finally enough. That night, I didn't become a star. I became a mirror for every kid who'd been told to shut up, for every athlete picked last. For every dream that was too heavy, too far, too poor, I showed them it was possible. Not easy, not clean, but possible. And in a world addicted to perfection, that's the most dangerous thing you can do. Show people the truth. So when they ask me now if it was worth it, I laugh. Because I was never chasing the belt. I was chasing freedom. And sometimes, freedom doesn't come in gold. It comes in silence, in scars, in knowing that even if they tear your name off the posters, they'll never forget your story, because you didn't just win, you changed what winning looks like. They said I'd never make it. They said I didn't look the part, didn't come from the right place, didn't speak loud enough, didn't have the money, didn't have the name, didn't have a shot. But you watched the whole story, and now you know. I never needed permission, I just needed one chance. And when that chance came, I didn't ask for the spotlight. I took it, not because I was special, but because I refused to quit when it got ugly. Because every time the door slammed, I built my own. This isn't just about boxing. It's about every kid who's been told they're too small, too poor, too different. It's about every person carrying a weight the world refuses to see. This was for you. If this story hit you deep, if it reminded you of someone you know, if it gave you even a drop of strength, do me a favor. Drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to know where the fighters are, the real ones, the ones who don't quit. Smash that like button if you felt the pain and the payoff. Subscribe to this channel if you believe stories like this need to be told. Share this video with someone who's been counted out but is still standing. Because no matter where you come from, your fists can still write your name in history, and we're just getting started.